Good morning, guys, and welcome to a new week of home learning. It's Monday, the 18th of January, and we're doing our final lesson on percentages today. Now, before we do percentages, I want to do our starter as usual. So what you do is have a read of those three questions and then pause the video, have a go in either your home learning book or your workings paper or your whiteboard, however you found that you like to do it. So give it a pause, have a go, and then unpause and we'll talk through the answers. Okay, we're back, and let's go through the answers now, see how you did with your starter. So the first question, marbles are put into bags of 10. 67 bags of marbles are packed. 3 more marbles are added to each bag. How many marbles are there in total now? Now, I must admit, when I first read this question, I was really confused because I forgot to read here where it says 67 bags of marbles. I read 67 marbles. So we're trying to work out how to fit those into bags. What it basically means is we know we've got 67 bags of 10 because bags of marbles have 10 in. It says 3 more marbles are added to each bag. So instead of now being bags of 10, they're bags of 13. So we know we've got 67 bags, 13 in each bag. So we need to do 67 times 13, which is 871. You could have done it short multiplication, long multiplication. You could have counted up in your 13 67 times if you so wish. But the answer is 871. The second part, work out the missing digits. It was a bit of inverse use here because 5 times something equals 105. So we know the final answer is 105. So if we split that into 5 equal parts by dividing by 5, we get 21. And then we know that we need 2 numbers that are going to multiply together to give us 21. So that is 3 and 7. If you put 3 in the middle box and 7 in the end one, it's still right. Commutative law, it doesn't matter which order. It will still work as a multiplication. Now the last one involved a little bit of ratio. So a toy train costs 3 times as much as a rocket. So straight away I noted that 3 to 1 is the ratio. For every 1 part, we have 3 parts of a toy train. So there's 4 parts in total of the total cost. So the total cost of a train and the rocket is £52. So together, £52, 3 parts of that are going to be on the train and 1 part is going to be on the rocket, but all those parts have to be equal. So the way to split something equally is to divide it. So we do 52 divided by the 4 parts I have, which leaves me with 13. And then it says, how much does the train cost? So the train costs 3 times as much as the rocket. So we times that 13 we've got for 1 part by 3 to get £39. So once we worked out as a bit of ratio, it was fairly straightforward to get there. So well done if you got all of them. If you got some of them, great. You found them a bit tricky but had a good go, that's great as well, as long as we're mathematically warmed up. So let's move ourselves on. So our learning intention today is to solve problems involving percentages. As I said, it's your last day on percentages today. So we're going to be going through 2 different ways to find percentages. There'll be some number questions and then we're going to talk about some worded problems as well, which is the learning you'll be doing on your Mathletics. So star words today are percentage, surprisingly, convert, divide, fraction and multiple. These are words we've used throughout last week and we'll be using them again today. So last week we looked at finding maybe 50% or 25% when we, or 10% when we knew those are the easier percentages to find. What happens if we want to find 15% or 17% or 73%? We need to use a slightly different method. So we could use the fraction method we used last time, but there's actually a slightly easier way, I feel, that we're going to move on to now. But feel free to use the method from last week if you like, but I'm going to show you something new. So how we do it is we break the percentage for 15% of 200, break 15% into manageable chunks of things that we can divide to get easily. So 10% and 5%, both pretty easy to do. So what we're going to do is firstly we're going to find 10% of that number. So to find 10%, we divide by 10. Simple as that, split it into 10 parts. So if we divide the 200 by 10, we're left with 20. So 10% is 20. But we know we want 15%, so there's got to be a way to use that 10% to get 5%. So hopefully you're thinking 5 is half of 10, so therefore we can just find half of 10% to give us 5%. So let's divide it by 2, or cut it in half. So 20 cut in half is 10, which is 5%. So 5% of 200 is 10, 10% of 200 is 20. The way to finish it now, we add the 10% and the 5%, and that will give us 15%. So 5% was 10, 10% was 20, 10 add 20 is 30, therefore 15% is 30. We found 15% of 200 is 30. We split it, the percentage, into manageable chunks. For 17%, we'd find 10% and then 1% twice. There's lots of different ways you can do it. Let's move on. So I want you to think of a way to find 30% of 160. So I want you to think of the way you might do it. I want you to then think, can you find a different way? So I'm going to take the easy one out. If we find 10% of 160, and then we could times that by 3 for 30%, that's the easy way. What I want you to do now is you're going to pause the video and just have a think. You're not going to do it, but I just want you to have a little think. How else could we do it? Could we use 1% maybe? Could we use 5%? How could we do it? Now remember, I've taken 10% and then times by 3 out of it, so give it a pause. Have a little think, don't note anything down, but just think to yourself maybe for a minute or so. Right, so hopefully you've had a think. Now there's loads of ways you could do it. You could find 1% and then times it by 30. You could find 5% and times it by 6. You could find 10% and then 1% and do 10%, add 21%. So it's up to you how you find it. But I think the quickest way would probably be the way I took out of action, which is to find 10% and times it by 3. Now, on your whiteboard, your spare paper, however you're doing your workings, what I'd like you to do is find the following percentages of those numbers using the method we've just done. So think, what easy percentage chunks could we split them into? So 47%, what could you easily split that into? Maybe 10% and then times it by 4, and then a 5% and 2 1%. So it's completely up to you. Remember 30%, how would you find it? So pause it and find your different percentages that add up to make 47% of 500 and then 30% of 160. Have a go at finding them for me, and we'll have a look through the answers in a second. So pause it for me and have a go. Good. Hopefully we didn't find that too tricky. The trickier one was the first one, the 47%. But once you got your mind and set it out clearly, it was all right. So 47% of 500 is 235 kilograms. So the way I would have done it is to find 10% and times that by 4. Then cut 10% in half for 5% and add that onto the 4 10%. And then I would have divided the 10% we had by 10 again to give me 1%, and I would have added 2 of those onto my final answer. And the bottom one, as we said before, I would find 10% of 160, which is 16, and then I'd times it by 3, 48. What I want you to do now, in your learning from home books, there are lots of questions there, all the way to O. Some of them are easier, so at the beginning I'd start off with those ones, and then they get progressively harder. Some of them will require you to think back to how we use decimals. Some of them are pushing towards greater depth standards, so if you struggle on a couple, that is okay. As long as you're getting some of them, you are achieving the LR, you're doing fine. So you're going to pause and have a go at see how many of those you can get in your home learning books. Once you're done, back you come and I'll explain what we're doing next. So pause it, off you go in your home learning books, please. Right, so that was okay, didn't take too long. So let's move ourselves on now. Here are your answers. So again, the best thing to do, I would suggest, is to pause this video and then just to mark your answers as you've got them. And they're all there, so we can move on to a mathematics portion of our learning. So pause the video, mark your answers, and then unpause. There we go. So we should be back and all marked. Hopefully we did okay. So what I want you to do now is have a look at this question for me, because this is another part of learning which we're going to do today. So what is the question asking me to do, and how would I solve it? So Alfie has just got the results of his maths test. He scored 42 marks, which is 70%. How many marks are on the test? So we're not told how many marks in total he's got it out of, but we're told how many he got and what percentage of the total that was. We can use that information to find the 100%, to find how many marks there are. So we know that 70% is 42, and we want to find 100%. So there's got to be an easy number which we can times really easily to get that 100%. Now I can't really times anything by 70 to get 100, but I can find 10% from this 70% and then times that by 10. So let's have a go. Finding 10% makes it easy, as I've said. So 70% equals 42. Then to get 10%, I'd divide 70% by 7, because there's 7 lots of 10 in 70. So if I'm dividing the 70% by 7, I've got to do the same to this 42. So 42 divided by 7 is 6, which means 10% is 6. Now, already I hope some of you are thinking, right, I can use that 6. I know what to times that by to get 100%. If 10% is 6, if we times that by 10, we'll get 100%. So 6 times 10 is 60. So there was 60 total marks. So it takes a little bit of thinking about it. You look at the question, you think, what is it actually asking me to do? And what's the easiest way to get there? Now, that's what you're going to be doing in your Mathletics learning. So what I'd like you to do is you'll, in a second, go on to Mathletics and you'll complete your assigned task, which is all about solving worded problems. You're going to need to put all the learning you did last week and today into action to complete it as best you can. And then once you've finished that, please go and do some TT Rockstars, so we're keeping ourselves sharp with our times tables and our quick calculation. That's it for today. So Mathletics and TT Rockstars, and I'll be checking later on as to who's attempted the Mathletics so I can put it on our tracker. I will see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye now.